Okay. All right. So today we're getting into sort of the meat of this unit. The main part of this unit is research methods in psychology. I'm not going to lie to you, it's not the most exciting stuff in the world. It's a little bit dry, but it's really important. Okay, because you got to know all these. Some of this is going to be review for some of you all. Those of you that know that, like, all of y'all have learned about experimentation before. Some of you know about correlation already. And so some of it's going to be review. But there is an F on one of the FRQs on the AP exam. There are two of them. FRQs are short answer questions. One of them is specifically research methods. And the last thing we're going to talk about today that we're going to do an activity on is like maybe the most common term to show up on an FRQ. Okay. So, how do we know about human behavior? Well, even though psychology is an imperfect science and a lot of it is not provable, right, because we're dealing with hypotheticals like the mind, we do still have to do as much research as possible and get as much get as much empirical evidence towards our theories as possible. We can't just rely on intuition or gut instinct, okay? And we can't rely on just making assumptions about things. Does anybody know what the, like, when you assume what happens? You can say it. Nobody knows what happens when you assume? Well, you do. There you go. Yep. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Okay. We can't just assume things. Okay. Like, for instance, who in here has heard of empty nest syndrome? Okay. What is it? Griffin, what is it? Yep. Griffin, have you moved out of your bed? I think you were in that exact same spot on Wednesday. Yeah, so there's this idea that when all the kids leave the house, your parents get all sad and depressed and whatnot. And it sounds nice and everything. It's not true. Okay. It sounds like it would be true, all right? But it's what's called pop psychology, all right? Popular psychology, which is a lot of like what you see, like BuzzFeed psychology. Um, Empty nest syndrome. What they have found is that parents, when the last kid leaves the house, they're sad for like a couple of days, and then they're like, "Holy crap, this is actually really nice." I don't have to clean up after this slob. I don't have to make them sandwiches every day for lunch, blah, blah, blah. Like, parents actually, you want to think that your parents are just sitting there pining away for you when you're out of the house. They're actually out having a grand time because you're not there anymore. Okay. So that's what psychologists, they have to do that research and not just say, hey, that sounds correct. um, Part of this is due to the fact that we are way too confident in our beliefs about things. We are way too confident that what we believe is right. Okay, we've gotten to this point where we don't distinguish anymore between fact and opinion. And people think because they have an opinion that all opinions are valid. Okay. When you have some fact and there somebody's like, well, I don't agree with that. And they're like, well, it's a fact. And it's like, well, that's just my opinion. Like, sorry, like, just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it's right. Okay. It's the same thing with like people with like freedom of speech, where they're like, First Amendment, I can say whatever I want. If I want to say this word, then I can say this word. All right, fine, you can, but that doesn't protect you from being criticized by other people for doing it. Freedom of speech doesn't mean you can just go around saying whatever you want. Okay, you're allowed to, but you can also get in trouble for it. Okay, interesting concept. I mentioned this on the first day. You don't have to write this down, but you wouldn't be asked about it, I don't think. But there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where they have found that people of low cognitive ability greatly overestimate how smart they are. People of low cognitive ability think that they are actually very, very smart. This came from kind of a funny thing that happened. There was this guy named MacArthur Wheeler. He was a bank robber. And he was caught. He wasn't a good bank robber. He was caught relatively easily because he went in to rob a bank and he had put lemon juice on his face. Does anybody know why in the hell he might think to put lemon juice on his face to go in and rob a bank? Anybody know? Yeah. Lemon juice is invisible ink. If you put lemon juice on a piece of paper and put it in the oven, it'll, like, if you write something on it, kind of like in the office when Dwight writes a message on a piece of paper with his urine. Okay, if you write something in lemon juice on a piece of paper, put it in the oven, the message will show up on the piece of paper. This dude thought that putting lemon juice on his face would make his face invisible to cameras, which it does not do, unsurprisingly. This dude thought he was so clever, but he just wasn't smart enough to recognize that he wasn't smart. Okay? It's basically like people who are incompetent are too incompetent to recognize that they are incompetent. And they actually think that they are a lot smarter than other people. They can't recognize their own lack of ability. And everybody probably knows somebody like that. So, one of the other things that gets in the way of us being able to critically think, we go with our gut too much, and then what is called hindsight bias. Now, some of you all have probably heard of hindsight bias before. You've heard the phrase like hindsight is 2020. This is also called the I knew it all along phenomenon. And I'm going to give you a couple examples, and then I'm going to have you all come up with your own. But humans, we are really good at predicting the future once the future has become the past. We're really good at knowing what was going to happen once that thing has already happened. It seems obvious that it was going to happen after the fact because it happened. But we have a bias in which we like to think that we knew beforehand that something was going to happen, even if we actually didn't. We generally misrepresent or misremember our earlier predictions. For instance, 2016, all right, Donald Trump wins the election. And after the fact, all these pundits, all these political people are like, I knew it was going to happen. Knew that was going to happen. Knew that the middle of the country, blah blah blah, blue collar states, or blah blah blah. I knew that was going to happen. Okay, did anybody actually think that was going to happen beforehand? No. Nobody was saying that Donald Trump was going to win the election. Everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Okay, even 538, which is one of the best statistical websites for like politics, did not have Donald Trump winning the election. But after the fact, it's easy to go back and say, oh, yeah, based on this and this and this, like I knew this was going to happen because it had already happened. I'll give you another one, and then I want you to come up with your own. Sports. Okay. Anytime there's an upset, people like to say after the fact, like, oh, I knew the Trailblazers were going to beat the Lakers in game one. No, you didn't. The Lakers have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. You didn't think that the Trailblazers was going to beat them. Okay. But we like to misremember what we thought ahead of time or what we thought beforehand. All right. Does anybody have an example of your own that you'd like to share with the class? Yep, that's hindsight bias. Yep, yeah, a lot of stuff with tests. Okay, knew you should have studied that even though you didn't. Get your test back. You got a question wrong, and you're like, ah, damn, I knew that was wrong. So you just like to choose, like you just do this weird thing where you just like choose the wrong answer for shits and giggles just to like keep things, just to spice things up a little bit. Okay, no, you didn't know it was wrong, or you wouldn't have chosen that answer. Okay, all right. Anybody else have a good example of hindsight bias? No? All right. Does everybody understand this? Hopefully. Okay. Hindsight's 2020. We see everything clearly once it's already happened. So, what we have to do as psychologists is think critically and not just blindly accept arguments. If I can get you all to do anything in this class, it's going to be to be skeptical about things. Be skeptical about things I tell you. Look it up on your own, research stuff on your own. All right. Don't just take people's words for it. We have a tendency to do this, especially when a piece of information fits into our pre existing belief. Okay. This is called belief bias or confirmation bias, where we look for information that fits what we already believe. When it fits what we already believe, we have a tendency to not dive into it and question it. But we need to, okay? We need to do that in psychology because, especially with psychology, there are a lot of opinions here. So we got to be able to identify bias. With psychologists, I'll point out like Freud is a great example of somebody that like you can read his stuff and Freud's biased as hell towards himself. And so you got to take things with a grain of salt. News, right? All news networks, for the most part, have bias. Whether you watch CNN or whether you watch Fox or MSNBC or OAN, One American Network. Hopefully you're not watching that because that's like, or if you're watching who's the guy? I don't know why I can't remember his name. He's fat and he screams all the time, red face. Alex Jones, yes, yeah. Hopefully you're not watching him and buying, tactical soap from him, or believing that like all the frogs are turning gay, right? Like he said, but we gotta be able to recognize bias when we see it. What's the agenda? Everything always has an agenda. Okay, so being able to kind of pick out what somebody's agenda is, whether it's news, whether it's one of your friends trying to get you to do something, all right? What's the source? Question the source, all right? Did somebody just find something on Reddit? Is it just like going off with something a Reddit commenter said? Okay. Is it going off just, what Rush Limbaugh said? Or, what is the source? Is it something that somebody just says people are saying? Generally, if you see that, the phrase people are saying, that means that nobody's actually saying it. This person is just saying that people are saying to make it sound like people are saying it, but they're actually the only one saying it. Is it fact or is it opinion? A lot of the news shows that we watch aren't actually news shows. They're opinion shows. Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, Tucker Carlson on Fox. Those are opinion shows. Okay? If you want news, like go to the BBC or Reuters, or watch Mike Wallace or Anderson Cooper. Okay, those are better. Those are news shows, while the other ones are opinion. Okay, and then understanding that just because two things are related doesn't mean that one causes the other. So I've been using this example for a couple of years in terms of critical thinking. My grandfather likes sending out these like chain emails that he gets from somebody else that are all just fear mongering stuff. Little bit of racism sometimes mixed in there as well, but it's all stuff like everything's in big bold, like red letters, like you'll never believe what Hillary did now, okay, or whatnot. And he sent out this one a couple years ago. I think it was after Colin Kaepernick kneeled for the first time, and it was like, can you believe what these Seahawks players are doing? And it took me about 30 seconds to find the actual source of it, but it was this picture right here, which appears to be a picture of Seahawks player Michael Bennett in the locker room waving a burning American flag while his teammates, including there's Richard Sherman, while his teammates and his coaches, Pete Carroll's got a football in his hand, dance behind him, egging him on. And you look at this and you say, oh my God. First they're kneeling, now they're dancing around a burning American flag indoors in a locker room. If you don't, if you just if this fits the narrative that you want to believe about NFL players, that they all hate America, then you're gonna say, wow, this just confirms what I already believe about these players. But if you actually think critically about it, what's something other than the fact that he's burning an American flag indoors? What would be another red flag in this that maybe this isn't real? It looks photoshopped. Yeah, it just doesn't look good. Okay. All right. Yeah, do a lot of celebrating, but they don't do it around burning flags a whole lot. Anything else that just on first glance you're like, "Wait, this doesn't look legit." Okay, yeah, well, yeah, okay. What about with the fire? What is generally present when there's fire? Smoke. There's no smoke. Okay? That's because this picture isn't real. This is the real picture. Perfectly harmless picture of Michael Bennett dancing in the locker room. This is the other real picture with this dork burning an American flag. All right? That's what happens if you just take a second to examine something. You're going to find out a lot of information about it. And so don't just take things for their face value. All right? Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So we got to remember psychology is a science. as much as it can be. Some of it can't be proven, but we try our best. So it all has to start with a theory. And let me flip my page. All right, so a theory is a coherent explanation tying together previous research. Basically, you look at previous research and you say, I have an idea about this. So for instance, in the 90s, I think, the theory that heat, when it's hot outside, people are more likely to act violently. So they put together this theory, and from this theory, from theories aren't necessarily provable. That's why it's the theory of evolution, because it's hard to prove evolution, even though it is a real thing. Like, it's hard to do experiments with it. Okay, but from that, you can develop a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a testable prediction between two variables, and it's usually set up as a what? How do you usually set up? Easiest way to set up a hypothesis. An if-then statement. And this stuff should be a review for you all. If it is hot outside, then people are more likely to commit aggressive acts. We got your independent variable heat, you got your dependent variable aggressive acts. So this is what they did. Okay, and from this, they were able to get empirical data. Empirical data is evidence for a hypothesis that comes from whether it's observation, experience, experimentation, any of those things. But it is hard evidence. It's real data. Empiricism is using science to prove something. You probably heard about that, maybe in terms of John Locke. I think John Locke was like the founder of empiricism. So what came out of this is what's called the heat hypothesis. They did field studies where they got data from cities. All right, they determined that violent crimes were murder, rape, assault. It was probably more than that, but I'm not sure. Murder, rape, assault, and they got all of the data from certain cities on those crimes. And they looked at it in the hot months of the year, and they found that, wow, those crimes go up when it gets hotter outside. So it doesn't prove that heat is the cause, but they actually ruled out another cause. They did other research, and I'm blanking on it, but it doesn't prove that heat's the cause, but they found a pretty strong correlation between the two, and they ruled out one of the other things that they thought could be a cause. All right. They did lab experiments. They found that in a lab where they jack up the temperature, people are less likely to be helpful when it's hot. We're not as attracted to other people when it's hot, which would lead us to believe that we don't like other people as much when it's hot. If you're in a car with no AC, they found that you're more likely to honk your horn if it's hot and you don't have any air conditioning. Okay? And so this is all empirical evidence that supports this hypothesis. Are there any questions about that? All right, now, when we have a hypothesis and when we are doing research, this is very, very, very important. All right, and this is what you're going to do some work on here in a little bit. The first thing that we need to do when we determine what our variables are, is we need to determine how we will measure those variables in the research. Okay, need to determine how we are going to measure those variables to get that empirical evidence. So researchers, before doing the experiment or the research, have to develop what are called operational definitions. And this is, all right, these are, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. Oh, this is, operational definition is one term that is probably the most likely term in this class to show up on an FRQ. All right, these operational definitions allow for us to quantify the variables. Okay, what we want to do with these is, because numbers are unbiased. Okay, numbers are unbiased. So we want to find a way to be able to put a number with a variable. This helps to eliminate researcher bias. Okay, because you have strict parameters as to what you are measuring. Let's say that we're doing research on whether young, attractive teachers, whether students smile more in classes that have like young, fun teachers than like older teachers. Well, we have to define, what do we mean? What is a smile? We have to figure out that, all right, a smile is when the corners of the mouth are turned up at 36 degrees or whatnot, or 2/3 of teeth are showing, or anything like that. We got to determine what is a smile, because then when you go in and do research, I may have Landon thinking one thing is a smile, and I might have Gabriella thinking something different is a smile. So then the research is, it's no commonality with it. This also allows for replication. What this means is that if I do research and get some sort of results, and another researcher looks at it and says, holy crap, like that's really interesting, I want to do that too to see if I get the same results, they can then do it, and they know how you measured the variables. Or if somebody says, I don't think that that's legit, then they can go and do it again to see if they get the same results using the same measurables. For instance, I'll give you an example of this. And we're going to talk more about this later on in the last unit. But this is one of the most famous studies in psychology. It's what's called one of the big five. Study done in 1962 by a guy named Stanley Milgram. He was a social psychologist. He did it in New Haven, Connecticut. And what he wanted to look at was, how did seemingly normal Germans commit the atrocities that they did during World War II? So he wanted to study obedience to authority. So what he did was he set up an experiment where, in the experiment, there was an authority figure, a guy wearing a white lab coat, a teacher, and a learner. They told the people participating that it was a study on memory. There was a teacher in one room asking questions to a learner that was in another room. The learner was actually part of the experiment. He was called a Confederate, so he was in on it. And they thought they were doing it on memory, so they would read them out something, and then the learner had to recite back something, and if they got it wrong, the teacher was supposed to administer an electric shock to them. They had a little button, and they pressed it, and they believed that it was shocking the person in the other room, who they could hear over there, but they couldn't see. And the shocks went up in intensity each time. And they had an authority figure standing there telling the teacher when they didn't want to do it anymore, that the research demanded that they continue. Okay, what they found with this, they were studying obedience to authority. What they found with this was that 66% of participants were willing to administer up to 450 volts. Okay, which is enough to kill somebody. It was the highest level that they went. 66%, 2/3 were willing to go that far if being told to by an authority figure. Now, they weren't actually hurting anybody. They found that out afterwards. But Milgram released these results, and no pun intended, like the American public was shocked. Okay, they said, there's no way that that's right. We are not that evil. We are not the Germans. So they replicated it, and they replicated it, and they replicated it using all these different quantifiables, and they get the exact same results each time. They still do it today, and they get the same results. Okay, that's why if you want to watch, there's a movie on it. Oh crap! I think it's on Netflix, called Experimenter. It's pretty good. Right? So operational definitions, we have to have those to measure, to lay out how we are going to measure the variables. Does that make sense to everybody? So for instance, for aggression can be defined as number of rapes and murders. Okay, you can get that data. That's a number. If you're doing a study on intelligence, IQ can be measured, intelligence can be measured by giving an IQ test. If you're doing a study on depression can be quantified. Mental illness can be quantified using self-report inventories, such as Beck's depression inventory. If any of you have ever been assessed for depression, chances are they gave you this. This is a cognitive assessment. All right, and I think it's out of 60. So you can answer these, and then they add them up, and the closer to 60, 40. Over 40, extreme depression, that's a quantifiable number that they can use to operationally define what depression is. Does that make sense? Are you guys following this or not? Yeah? Okay, because this is really important. Anybody have any questions? All right. I'm not going to show it to you, but if you have other questions, I linked 2 helpful videos on here. They're good videos. They're kind of dry. Okay. This one's about 2 minutes long. This one's about 5 minutes long. But they are both good videos. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to share again. All right.